Hello, and welcome to episode 7 of Crypto Convos. I'm your host, MK Lords, and joining me today is Andrea Castillo. She's joining us from Arlington, Virginia, and she writes for The Umlaut and Mercatus. Very prolific writer, by the way, too. I came across her work probably, I guess it was about a year or so ago. Was when I first started following her, and she always has very interesting things to say. And yeah, I wanted to bring her on and get to know her a little better. So, how are you doing, Andrea?
Doing great. Glad to be here.
Awesome, awesome. Thank you. So, what has been, what I always like to ask people is, what is their personal philosophy and how has it kind of changed? Where are you at now and how has that progression been throughout your life?
Great. So I have a much more interesting answer to this question now than I think I have had for most of my life. So uh, good for the crypto combos. I think I've generally been pretty libertarian. I come from a Republican Catholic family, just standard issue kind of conservatives. In college, I got interested with the economics department and the Libertarian Club after the 2008 financial crisis. I was just a run-of-the-mill poli-sci major, and then I was like, oh crap, I have no idea what's happening. I should probably learn. So I went to Florida State. We have a really great Austrian slash public choice economics department, so I was in a really great place to kind of learn the best of all of these schools of thought and find out a lot more, find all the resources I needed to develop that. So broadly, I'm still a classical liberal, right? I believe in private property, in voluntary exchange, in living your own life and letting live. But this kind of relates to our topic today. As I've gotten older, I've kind of sobered my utopianism, right? So for a long time, I just kind of took it for granted, like, oh, private property, voluntary exchange, like, what's not to like? And I just kind of thought everybody thinks like me. If I just explain it to them in a certain way, then we'll have our like libertarian utopia. Since then, I've come to learn that there is diversity in many ways, and that includes ideological diversity, and just coming to realize the fact that we might not be able to convince everybody of our system. And so how do you deal with kind of a plurality of ideologies, of creeds that sometimes clash? So that gets kind of interesting. And I think you're seeing around the world with different developments in like geopolitics, with the ascendancy of Russia, you're seeing this kind of come to heel in a lot of ways and on a lot of levels. So I am, let's see, I don't really have a title for this, but I'm a disillusioned classical liberal.
All right, and yeah, that's great. Actually, I was talking with Chris Ellis a couple weeks ago, and we were talking about labels and kind of how do you label yourself and kind of how that works. So I definitely agree with the disillusionment part. I think that's what kind of led me to studying anarchism, and kind of where I'm at now is I guess you could say I'm a personal anarchist. Like I feel that it could work for me, but I'm not really worried about convincing other people of it. And also what you mentioned about the plurality, that's why I'm kind of into panarchism too. I definitely see that people have the right to choose whatever kind of belief structure they want. I mean, especially if they've believed it for a really long time, it's something that that's fine. They should be allowed to do that, and I don't want to force my ideas on them. So I
Mhm.
definitely get that.
Right. The challenge comes when somebody else's ideology, part of it is forcing it on you, right? So it's being prepared to grapple with that kind of tension. Like, for instance, the Islamic State. I don't know if you saw the Vice documentary. That it's like a five-part series, just looking at like how the Islamic State is developing and like how they're reaching out to young people and getting them like involved. Like they truly believe in it, and what they believe in is a global caliphate. Uh, so I, I can give them the ethics of liberty, and they're not going to come around. So one of the great things about Bitcoin, kind of getting to the topic, is it provides us tools so that we don't need to necessarily convince everybody of anarcho-capitalist principles to have a little bit of anarcho-capitalism in our lives, right? So people that are living in areas that are under the control of the Islamic State for right now, they have the option of Bitcoin. Maybe not everybody, but that's something they can use to, pay for blogging services, to send money elsewhere, to receive money, whereas 15, 20 years ago, they're just kind of SOL. So that's one of the upshots, right, of this new kind of brave new world of clashing ideologies, the breakdown of the new world order.
Yeah,
Fun stuff.
absolutely. Yeah. And I think you're like the third person who's recommended I watch that documentary. So now I really need to watch it. I really do, because that stuff does fascinate me. And it's something that, like you said, you really can't force it on other people, but Bitcoin is opening up these doors for others. One of the women who spoke at Bitcoin in the Beltway was Fresh Faro, and she works with the Women's Annex, who does pay women in Afghanistan in Bitcoin to blog, which is pretty subversive. I mean, they have to be extremely careful about talking about it in Afghanistan because it's pretty controversial. But it's bringing opportunity to people. And how did you first find out about Bitcoin? What were your initial thoughts?
So I have a pretty great story. It was, I guess, when did it start? 2009. So it probably would have been early 2010. My boyfriend was like using, you remember Stumble Upon, where you can like just randomly click websites. He actually stumbled upon Satoshi's white paper. Nice find.
Yeah.
So we have always been very interested in, anarcho-capitalism, and especially free market monetarism, free banking, and he discovered this peer-to-peer cryptocurrency that, provided all that and like more than we've ever had before. So we started kind of following it. He was pretty active in like the Bitcoin forums. The price would have been less than $1 at this point. So like this is back in the day when you could like mine on your laptop and get like hundreds of Bitcoins. Sounds great. We told our friends about it who were, mildly interested. They're all libertarians and thinking like, oh, that's cool. But it was always kind of like, oh, there's, crazy Patrick and his like internet money. It's just a hobby. It's just a fun thing to do. We wanted to think it was going to be something more, but you don't want to be the crazy person like immediately like buy all the Bitcoins. Although in retrospect, of course, we should have. But so a couple of months later, I guess he was uploading a new Linux distribution or something, and he said, should I take the time to try to save these like little Bitcoins that are worth like a penny, or just upload my new distribution? And he decided to just upload the new distribution. So there was hundreds of Bitcoins that we lost. It's kind of just, it happened. It's a funny story. And we still bought a bunch like later on, but that's kind of a cautionary tale, I guess. But we also are contributing to future deflation, so you're welcome, all of you, providing a positive externality here. But yeah, so we've been kind of monitoring it since then. Our friends, we started using it with our friends to just like pay for stuff. I don't know. I moved up to DC in, I guess, 2012. January 2012. I was an intern at the Mercatus Center before being a research assistant. At around the same time that my former colleague, he's moved on to a new Bitcoin project, but Jerry Brito was looking to do a paper on Bitcoin. And in different conversations at lunch, I mentioned the story of our, lost Bitcoin fortune and just, that we'd been following it for a while. So he, asked me if I wanted to write a paper with him on it, and I said, sure, why not? So out of that came the Bitcoin primer. We published that in, I guess, summer of 2013, and this would have been one of the first like mainstream, just like Bitcoin 101 papers to go out. So that had a really nice impact, and it's kind of funny. We had to walk kind of a thin line on this one because we were both very sympathetic to Bitcoin, very supportive of, crypto anarchy, But at the same time, we're in DC, and our role is to communicate with policymakers, some of whom would be immediately antagonistic to Bitcoin. So we tried to explain Bitcoin, the good, the bad, and the ugly, right? And in doing so, explaining why it would behoove them to support adoption and resiliency as opposed to regulation and just shutting it down. And the case we made to them was, well, you can't shut it down. You're going to look dumb if you try. And there's a lot of benefits that you would be missing out on, like even if you are worried about the downsides, you can handle those while still reaping the growth, the expanded technology, the innovation, and that was pretty successful. Jerry later testified on a House committee just looking at Bitcoin, and later Tim Lee at the Washington Post described it as a Bitcoin love fest. So that was pretty bizarre to see because only months before this we had Chuck Schumer saying like shut it down, and then everyone's like, oh, Bitcoin. They don't want to be the guy who's like anti-Bitcoin. They don't want to be the old fogey. So I really appreciate, I think Jerry was like a visionary on this. He was writing about it for Reason magazine back in like 2011. So he was like an excellent leader in DC and kind of carved a little niche out in the political process to say, okay, you're not going to shut this down. And then from there, it became acceptable for other people just in the discussion to talk about it as if it was a real thing. It's not just like nerds on the internet, it's like, an innovative technology. So then you had the Federal Reserve Bank of, I think it was Chicago, Francois Valdez, he cited our primer. A bunch of like Goldman Sachs put out something, like all the banks had to get in on it. You can't not talk about Bitcoin now. So that's kind of my 1,000-foot experience so far. Later, Jerry and I and another former Mercatus colleague, Human Shadab, he's now a law professor at NYU. We have a forthcoming paper. I think we ended up going with the Columbia Law and Technology Review, but it's on it's kind of distributed, so the next layer. So explaining how blockchain technology works and how it can be applied to like securities trading and derivatives, and what old regulations might apply to this area. And then the next step is to explain, okay, well, you can't regulate it, so what are you going to do now? And our policy conclusions were the same, promote resilience, adaptation, and just be cognizant of potential problems so that you can be in a position to respond, but don't throw out the baby with the bathwater.
Right. So that's really interesting, and I did read the first paper you're talking about, and it was very interesting and very clear, and you both were very careful. And obviously, when you're talking with policymakers, that's always a concern. I think that there's still maybe not quite understanding Bitcoin. What do you see? You interact with these people a lot more. So what do you see as the biggest hindrance to them for as far as like accepting this new technology?
Okay, hello?
Hey,
Hey,
lost for a second. Very good. Did you get to hear that last question?
No, I didn't, sorry.
Okay, so yeah, so I was saying, you work a lot more with the policymakers and that side of things, and what have you noticed is the biggest hindrance to talking to some of these people about Bitcoin and encouraging them to not regulate it?
Right. So with this, I don't think it's anything with Bitcoin per se. It's just the mindset of a policymaker or just even somebody kind of behind the scenes, like working on Senate staff or whatever. Like they think in a regulate first mindset. So with old things, with just I call it the dinosaur economy industry, they don't have to worry about that because the old industries are so slow that there's like a lag and they're able to get away with it. With Bitcoin, it's something so new, so like not understood and so fast that I don't think they realize that the old ways won't work. So, inspiring a little bit of humility, I'd say is probably the biggest challenge. Just that, listen, this is bigger than anybody knows it's going to be, and you can't stop it. It's a hard argument to make because even with the internet, a lot of people complain about how major parts of it are so centralized, right? With like the DNS, right, servers, and just the many points of failure that governments can shut down. But with Bitcoin, unless you literally like set off an electromagnetic pulse or something, like there's no stopping it. So I'm kind of surprised. Like libertarians, you know, we are who we are. We don't like the state. That's great. I love it. I love the fire. But not all regulators are just like bad. Like they a lot of them mean well. And so once I explain like the truly remarkable things, the uplifting qualities and the potential that it holds, I think they get excited about it, right? So you can talk to them. You just got to speak their language.
Yeah, definitely, definitely. And what do you think about the proposed New York regulations and those that are trying to use lobbying attempts to kind of, educate these people and maybe lobby for not no regulation but less bad regulation?
Right. So, the New York regulations are terrible. I mean, there's no way around that. It was kind of disappointing, right? Because Losky acted like he was going to take all this input, and I'm a cool guy, I'm on Reddit, whatever, and then surprise, I suck. They face their own set of constraints. Like I have no idea what's going on behind the scenes, and it's clear that a lot of people have, a lot of monetary interest in stopping this, right? Especially in New York. But it's tough. So I'd rather have people who are like fluent in Bitcoin there than the like activist groups like Think About the Children. Like I'd prefer that they're there first because they kind of can frame the discussion, right? And I saw that firsthand with the primer. But on the other hand, like there's trade-offs, like you will have to at a certain point, or you don't have to, but there's a tendency to accept second best solutions. If you're there in the politics, it might look like, or it might actually be like a good trade-off, and then people that are kind of on the outside see that and they just see it as selling out. Now, I don't know, maybe I'm a little myopic, but with all this regulation stuff, I just kind of don't care because like I just think it's gonna go, right? So like New York can regulate it, and then New York is gonna not get any of the benefits, or the United States will not get as many benefits as people in the developing world will, right? Or just a small micronation that decides to be very like friendly to Bitcoin, like they're gonna reap all the gains. So I have a tendency to be biased about like the influence on the U.S., but Bitcoin is bigger than that, and yeah, I think it's going to behoove other states to be more competitive, especially since New York has had a monopoly on that game for too long.
Yeah, I certainly hope so, because, yeah, when it comes to New York, there is so much at stake, in the financial system and how completely broken that is, and the way Bitcoin can really come in and shake things up. There are obviously very powerful people who don't want that to happen, and they think that they can crush innovation, like people have tried to crush other technology in the past, but they don't realize that this is a totally different beast here.
Right. So, and like, okay, so one thing people say, I hear this a lot from the like more like, we need to talk to the state guys. Like they say, oh, well, Bitcoin's never going to take off if they don't have the banks. And I'm just thinking like, okay, the banks are standing on their last legs. Like they're not going to be here in 10 years. I'm not worried about those guys. Like, I don't know. It's just like a lack of like, I think long-term thinking. And also there's like the horse race aspect, like you're looking at CoinDesk every day and getting really like worked up about it, but like, really that's inconsequential in the long run.
Mm-hmm. And there's that kind of comfort. I mean, I think a lot of them don't even really, they're not even that worried about Bitcoin because they've become so comfortable in the entrenched system. They've become so, they're comfortable with their power. So they view threats to it as not very seriously because they have such a firm grasp on that power at the moment. But you definitely see, oh, that's fine.
I got a little pug down here.
Aww.
I'll bring
little Doge.
Okay, little Doge. Hey, buddy. This is
Hey,
Fritz the Big Pug.
Oh, so cute.
Named after F.A. Hayek. So there you go.
Nice, nice. Always happy to see Doges at the show. So we had one. Will Pangman's Doge made like a surprise guest appearance. It was I believe our second episode, and he had to do it from his car in Tampa. He'd been traveling a lot, and he had it all. He had like some stuff like kind of in the back there, and the dog would like peek his head through.
Oh, cute. Nice. Guest appearance.
Yeah, I love it. So. So that's great. So yeah, basically go back to these people are very comfortable, and I think in a lot of ways they don't take it seriously. I've seen I've been laughed at to my face about Bitcoin. Even like it's crazy the kind of hubris that these people have, and it's understandable. I mean, you get comfortable in that position.
Right.
So,
right.
And where do you see the greatest potential for people to really embrace Bitcoin? Is there a specific country even that you're thinking is going to really just, jump on board and be like, I would totally 100%? Because you're obviously going to see industry move away from New York once some form of these regulations get passed.
Mm-hmm. I think where Bitcoin will take off are those areas and industries in which there's the highest productivity, highest marginal product, right? So a lot of people, they look at Bitcoin and they say, this is good from a development perspective, this is good kind of like for charity purposes. And I think like in those worlds, like compared to what it was before, you'll see like definitely improvements. But in terms of the Bitcoin world, I mean, like resources tend to go to their most highly valued use. Right now, I think that's probably other like technology firms. So you see the earliest adopters of people like paying their wages in Bitcoin are in Silicon Valley, right? Nerds, techies are people. And I think they have the highest marginal value. So I think they will reap the gains and they will drive a lot of the value, which is how economics works.
Right, and that's great that you have that background. Was there anything that when you're studying Bitcoin that let's see, I'm trying to word this the best that I can. Were there any maybe like economic principles or anything that made you kind of suspect of Bitcoin, that made you kind of like, I don't know if this is such a great idea, or how did your economic background influence your perception of this?
Right. So, okay. Good economics, just like real plain economics, like Bitcoin is great. It's good as a medium of exchange. It's good as a store. Well, people say it's not good of a store of value. I think it is. And it's got all the properties of money. Monetary economics is difficult because on the one hand, like the existing monetary system is there and you do have to learn about it. And so you have to learn what I call fake economics, right? Like you need to learn like, yes, the money supply curve is like this because the Fed creates all the money, and when they want to, and like it doesn't make a lot of, I always have to relate it back to like the gold standard, right? Just like how normal money, like supply driven flows and stocks of money work. And translating that is really hard. So the last class I had taken before Bitcoin really blew up and I started like researching it was just a vanilla macro class, bad economics, right? So I was trying to think about it in terms of like Federal Reserve notes and like that model. And now I'm taking a class on money and banking where it's just like how money actually developed, and I'm like, light bulb. So there was never anything like about Bitcoin per se that stumped me. It was more like, how does the model apply? And now that I'm seeing like more intuitive monetary economics, Bitcoin makes a lot more sense to me. And by the way, I think this is why a lot of economists are kind of allergic or have been more allergic to Bitcoin. Even economists that are very amenable to free banking, what is this Bitcoin? Like, you don't want to like immediately, like your intuition might be like, this sounds good, like, oh, this Satoshi is a crypto anarchist, you say, my biases are such that I might like it. But you're, a professional. You don't want to just like immediately go out and be a fanboy or girl. But once they understand it, they're down with the clown, right? So I think it's totally like understandable that like good economists are not jumping to it right away. And I think it's good that they're like posing, scrutinizing it. But then, of course, you have economists that are on the bankroll of the Fed. There's some crazy, okay, the Federal Reserve like hires or has hired something like 60% of all like academic economists. This is, so my current money and banking professor, Larry White, he's cool. He has Bitcoin on the syllabus right now, so it's nice. But he received the Adam Smith Award at the Association of Private Enterprise Economists conference last year, and he was bringing up just the fact that the conflicts of interest with most economists are just like astounding. I might have the percentage wrong, but like some obscene majority of academic economists have like a direct financial interest with some Federal Reserve bank. So no wonder you have all this research that just assumes that the Fed, needs to be there. Like any discussion of an alternative, you're just thought of as a crank, right? That's why I just have like so much respect. Like, my God, like Larry White, George Selgin, like these like true like Austrian monetary economists are doing like God's work, like keeping the flame alive, while we're really like economists are just delusional, like they're in this dark age. So I hope that it's going to be fun to see them proven wrong.
Oh yeah, absolutely. You see that with within government so much. So many just bad ideas really rising to the top, and I mean, and you even. It's so ridiculous that like no one wants to point out that conflict of interest, but Vox just ran this piece with this horribly misleading headline. Like, we were wrong about Bitcoins. I know, isn't that some bullshit? So
right.
it's basically the gist of the article is, oh, we said it was okay for one of our journalists to buy Bitcoin, but we made him sell it because that's a conflict of interest, even though they, report on homes and they own homes and they report on, other things and they have other investments. And
not only that, okay, Vox is funded by General Electric, which is one of the biggest like crony corporations. Like they just that made me laugh when I saw that. And poor Tim Lee. I mean, like if any guy should be buying Bitcoin, it's that guy, because this is the one he's been covering it in the Washington Post of all places, and now he's at Vox. But like he's been definitely down with the clown for a long time. So shame on Vox.
Shame on Vox. I would quit if that happened. I would be like, okay, I'm not dealing with, like, you're missing out on a momentous, opportunity here, and you're just gonna kind of. Yeah, oh, terrible,
well,
terrible.
I think if he's sneaky enough, he can have an offshore wallet.
Right. I thought about that. I was like, well, how are they really going to test?
Yeah, what are you going to do?
The Bitcoin if you really wanted to.
Right. Maybe I'll start like a donation fund for Tim Lee. Like.
Oh, that's a great idea.
You can't help it, right? He's just like, I can't help it. Ezra Klein, I don't know. I'll go after those guys. Take it up with them.
He's been banned from buying Bitcoin. Help this man. He needs it. Someone get that started. We can get this started. So.
Right. Direct action.
Yeah, this has to happen.
But, yeah, I don't know. So I'm reading, I actually have this handy right here. It's for class. It's a great book. It's by a lady economist, so close to my heart, Vera Smith. She was a student of Hayek's, and this was her dissertation under Hayek. It's called The Rationale of Central Banking and the Free Banking Alternative. And it goes through the history of free banking, particularly in Scotland. They had a very robust free banking system for many years that was very successful. It was the rival of Britain, and they looked at Scotland and said, like, oh man, we're doing something wrong. Talks about the development of free banking in the U.S. in states in which there were more liberal banking laws. New York was a good one. They had better outcomes, right? They had fewer monetary fluctuations. They had, it was good. It worked. Markets work. And then she describes how somewhere along the way central banking took hold, right? So like there was never really a true free banking country in that. So even in Scotland, you had limits on the number of notes you could give out. Like you couldn't give out £1 notes because they thought that would hurt poor people. And other kind of marginal regulations. But once you have a regulation, it makes it that much easier to have another regulation and another regulation. And then in some countries, there was a bank that was designated as the lender of last resort, or it might have just like naturally functioned as that. And then over time, they get power, they're already there. Like, why not central banking? And that just became the status quo. but it wasn't for a long time, right? Like this is like people today just take it for granted that there should be a central bank to scientifically determine the money supply, but it's a relatively modern invention, and in fact, all of the Larry White has another paper that's kind of interesting that looks at like all the arguments that people give against a gold standard in favor of a central banking. So they say like, oh, well, the resource costs of extracting gold are high, and you'll have monetary fluctuations, like the purchasing price of gold will just be all over the place. But then like, so Larry White goes through each point and says like, actually, it's worse now than it was before, right? Like, freer banking wins on every count. So you've got this like entire industry of like economists and bankers whose like sole purpose is to justify this like path dependency. And along comes Bitcoin, right? Like ideology is tough. People believe what they believe. Even if their actions betray other revealed preferences, they're going to still keep thinking what they think, and that's part of their identity, and they're going to fight really hard to protect that. And I think with central banking, like, these economists don't want to think that they're just like rascals that are responsible for robbing people of their savings, right? They want to think like, no, like I think it's important that we don't have runs on banks. When, well, really, the reason there wasn't any runs on banks in the U.S. is because they had branch laws. You could only have one branch of a state. So, one big depositor comes to take out their savings, and then the bank goes bust, right? Well, if you had branches, you wouldn't have that problem, like you had in Scotland. So, but they tell these stories, and they think that's what they're there for. And, we could argue this for hundreds of years, and they'd still want to believe that. But with Bitcoin, you can put your money where your mouth is. You can't, like, it's happening. You can't just say no. So it's great.
Right. And there's been a long history of skepticism of central banking in general in this country, and you saw it really come out after the 2008 crisis. I think a lot more people became a lot more skeptical, but it goes even back further than that. There are certain, disenfranchised groups. You look at something like the Freedmen's Bank, for example, that was just, taking money from freed slaves, and it's gone, like literally that happened.
Right.
You had like entire generations of people being taught like this is not good. You don't want to store your money in the bank because they'll just take it, because they did just take it. So you have a lot of people who are unbanked too, even generationally unbanked, and I really see a lot of potential for Bitcoin to help them. So, and it's something that I think you're seeing, like I said, I think you're seeing that skepticism kind of coming back up, which is really good. And I think, it's only a matter of time before there's another kind of crisis that really kind of slaps people back into reality of, how these, the banks and whatnot, they're not really on your side. And I do believe, like you said, I'm sure the regulators, they have the best of intentions to protect people, and the economists, they don't want to believe they're rascals. They have the best, they really believe it, they're like true believers about it, and that's a bit scary.
Right.
That scares me to think about. But I do think people will recognize the power of this new technology too. But I always find myself kind of going off into possibility land, like, oh my gosh, like I started really when I finally started really understanding Bitcoin, really grasping it, because I don't come from an economics background. I don't come from like math, like programming and coding. All of that is like the complete opposite of where I came from. So, but once I really started finally understanding some of the principles, I was like, oh my gosh, this is revolutionary. It's gonna like smash things. It's gonna break stuff. It's gonna be awesome. But I got to pull myself back down to reality, and that's what I kind of wanted to talk about. One of your articles, which is so good, it's called "Bitcoin is Great, but it won't fix our monkey brains." And you write a lot of these. Really, I just love reading it because it just brings you back down to earth, and it's like, this is like realistic. So, can you talk a little bit about the ideas in that?
Sure. So I think this article was really a response to myself. Like earlier in the year, I wrote an article, I forget what it was called. It was like Bitcoin 2.0. Like, it was just nuts. It was fun to write, but like, so after the price run up in 2013, and after I had written the primer, I was like, oh man, this is a real deal. And then, you see Ethereum, you see like colored coins, you see all these like cool, fantastic, glittering projects, and you're just thinking like, or I was just thinking like, oh my God, the singularity is here, you know, kind of like these really just like unmoored utopian, it was a utopian, right? Utopian idea. And on top of that, you have this very kind of abstract idea, right? That is getting a lot of attention and people are making a lot of money on it at once. And then you have people that say, I want to get in on that. And then you have people saying, well, I'll do that for you. Here's this project. Here's this decentralized, distributed, you know, whatever, peer-to-peer, innovative, disruptive, like buzzwords. And people lose money on it, right? Like you've got these altcoins like every day and they, you know, put up a splash page and say, you know, give us money. And, you know, you have people thinking that, so talking about ideology, right? Like whatever your ideology is, people would say Bitcoin will do that. For me, since I'm, you know, anarcho-capitalist type, it was, you know, we're going to have this great, like, technological, innovative, like, utopia, seastead, whatever. For some others, it's we're going to have, you know, the poor, they're going to finally be empowered and we're not going to have inequality. For others, it's, you know, we're going to finally take down the corporations, right? Like whatever your boogeyman is, it seemed like Bitcoin was there to deliver us to a new utopia. And so I started seeing a lot of this, and well, one of the other major contributors to this is I was hanging in some IRC Bitcoin channels and just seeing what like these guys were saying. Like, you know, so they would post an article on some like new project that like if I would have seen it on my own, I would have thought it's like really cool, like ooh. But then I saw these guys who are like hardcore like programmers, like really early adopter Bitcoin people, and they would just like rip it to shreds and say like how stupid it is. And, you know, I don't have the technological kind of literacy that some of those people there had, and it just made me think like, what other things have I been just accepting based on my mood affiliation that, you know, is not only just like kind of ignorant, but also maybe even damaging because I'm lending my name to this idea that I apparently don't even know very much about. So thinking about that, and then just knowing what I know about like human cognition and like, so there's this field of research in economics called behavioral economics, and very influenced by this particular economist named Daniel Kahneman. He wrote a book called Thinking Fast and Slow, where he talked about like in economics we have the Homo economicus model, the rational actor, right, maximizes utility, and that's how we assume people behave. But he did a series of psychological experiments where he showed that a lot of the fundamental utility theories in economics actually didn't pan out as expected in the lab. And this is pretty robust. I don't think it's something you could just say like, oh, well, the experiment's not representing the real world. Like, I'm fairly convinced by the evidence that like, you know, maybe people are not just like perfect econs. And when you think about the way that humans developed, right, like evolution, we don't have a brain that was just like created by an omniscient God that said like this is how the perfect brain will work. You have over millennia, you have natural selection, right, and whatever works best at the time is what keeps going forward. So this, you know, not the worst brain in the world, but there's going to be some common errors we're going to have that we're not going to think about. And that's kind of what this book was getting at. So with a lot of Bitcoin stuff, I started to think about, okay, so we've developed a solution to a particular social problem. But just because we have the technical solution solved, does that mean that the social outcome will result? So there's this paper by Nick Szabo, oh gosh, I forget the title right now, microtransactions. So he's talking about like, so, okay, let's say we can make like instantaneous, cheap microtransactions. So what, right? Like the problem with microtransactions is like the biggest problem isn't the technical issues, it's the cognitive issues, right? So it's like each time you're asked to make a decision, that takes a little bit more of your energy out of your brain. And our brains are very lazy, they try to conserve energy. So we try to avoid making those kinds of decisions as much as we can. So his point was that microtransactions, even if we solve it, from a technical perspective, you're not going to see it take off for the cognitive reason. And so I think if you look at like a lot of the really popular Bitcoin companies, so like even Coinbase, you don't own your private key, right? Like that is not what the like Bitcoin idea is about, but that's one of the most popular like Bitcoin services, right? Or you have something like Zappo, with like they're making credit cards with Bitcoin. Like what? Like that's not what we were talking about. But you know, apparently there is a market demand. Even if we had like the best Bitcoin guru in the world stand up in front of everybody and say like, no, use Electrum and you know, multi-signature transactions is the way. You know, people wouldn't do that, and who can blame them? You know, they don't have they have their own lives. Like they don't have time to be thinking about that. So we need to be thinking about technology on a human level, right? Like you're going to have early adopters, like we already have with Bitcoin, the people that hold a lot of Bitcoin. They're going to have the most information about it, and they're going to be in the best place to know like the best decisions to make. From there, you're going to have downstream people that can still get some of the benefits from Bitcoin, but probably not as much as like the more hardcore people, and maybe not at all, right? So just because people in the developing world now can like make easy transactions. I mean, like you can bring a horse to water, but you can't make them drink, right? So some of it, education can go only so far, but like a lot of the solutions that people assume Bitcoin can solve, or a lot of the problems that people assume Bitcoin can solve, like might be actually a human problem. It might not be a technology problem. So I think that broadly is kind of what I was getting at. So like looking at like trends in macroeconomics or just like society. So Tyler Cowen, who's the director of the Mercatus Center, wrote this book that's been very influential to me called Average is Over. And he picks up a lot of ideas, actually first developed by Peter Thiel and others that study Silicon Valley, about the rapid exponential increase in processing power is growing to such an extent that the old rules of comparative advantage might not apply in the future. So in the past, the argument was always, okay, it's true. When we make a new technology, like the old people in the factory who used to do that job, they're going to lose their job. But hey, we created so many more things that there's going to be other jobs somewhere else, right? So the typical example is like after the development of cars, right? Then the people who used to manufacture buggy whips to hit the horses, they were out of a job. But then there's so many more jobs with cars that, hey, just get a job at the car factory. It's great. This is Schumpeterian creative destruction. Well, when you're in an economy where most people make money just using their brains, right, not producing things, and you're automating more and more things using computation and faster processing speed, you might get to a point where the only jobs that are created by this innovation are more jobs to create more innovation, right? So we might not see the kind of downstream gains that we've seen in the past. So what Tyler Cowen thinks is we're going to have a very bifurcated world, right? The middle class is going to hollow out, like, so there's going to be, it's not that people are going to starve, it's just that they're not going to have productive work. And this has been anticipated by economists for like hundreds of years. So like John Maynard Keynes wrote in the Economic Consequences of the Peace that, like, you know, his great-grandchildren will live in a world where they're just pure leisure, right? Okay, well, that's good, but then what do those people do? Like, how do they get their self-worth? I don't see like an easy answer. And so now comes something like Bitcoin. And earlier I said that I think most of the gains will go to the people with the highest productivity. On the one hand, I mean, it's allowing more productivity, so if you value that, that's good. But on the other, it's going to be a really unequal world, right? If what Tyler and these people say comes to be. So hopefully we're wrong. But you know, I only touched on this a little bit on the Monkey Brains article just because it's kind of a downer. But that's kind of the idea I'm talking about, right? Like Bitcoin, so it's not Bitcoin itself, but it's more like social dynamics are such that like just because we have this technological solution like doesn't mean it's endogenous to forces that are already occurring, right? It's not going to like change the course. So on the one hand, you can think about it like, so people who in the past would have been just locked into their life, let's say they live in a developing country and they're like brilliant and like high marginal product or potentially high marginal product, and then something like Bitcoin and these other averages over type technologies like allow them to leave, like great for that person. But I think there's a chance that more people are going to be in the low to zero marginal productivity bucket than the opposite. But I hope I'm wrong. I mean, so like once you solve like the material constraints that have like limited people for so long, right? Just like basic food, shelter, entertainment, like sociality. You'd think that'd be like, wow, let's kick back and relax. But, like I said earlier, like our brains were selected, like people who have worked all their lives, right? Like we get pleasure from working because it allows us to continue our life, right? Like our brains like keep doing that. So like in a world where we don't have that anymore, okay, maybe people become more creative, right? And that's a better world, so that they're not creating value materially, but they're creating value maybe spiritually, or they're just making a prettier, more beautiful world. That's good. But I don't know, to other people that is kind of bleak.
Well, I found it to be a sobering article, not necessarily a bleak article, but it definitely brings you back down to earth because it's something that I've been kind of thinking a lot on too. We are the biggest enemy, like we just human nature, I guess you could say. The kind of people are lazy. I'm lazy. I know I'm lazy. I realize that there are a lot of things that I do that are incredibly lazy, and when it comes to Bitcoin, laziness is extremely costly. So that causes you to lose money. So you have to be pretty vigilant about security, which most people just generally aren't when it comes to just their personal lives, whether it's their email account or it's just the way they conduct themselves online. They're not operating very secure. So one thing that I've learned from just being involved in the Bitcoin space is how important security is and how important it is to take those extra steps that may be a little bit difficult, to make sure that you are secure. I don't know that they're difficult. That's kind of subjective. I guess that depends on the person. But what it comes down to is this is something I hear Ernest Hancock saying a lot, and he badgered me about this too. And he's right. People want a just button. Just do it. Like they press a button and it works. So that's, I think, the biggest hindrance to mass adoption or widespread usage of it is people just, and it is easy to use. Like when you actually just set up a wallet, you get some Bitcoin, you send them. It's very easy to use functionally, but it's a bit harder to secure it, and people just don't want to take the time, despite the fact that it is their money.
Yeah. That the just button, that's an averages over argument, right? So like you have somebody who's smart enough not only to know Bitcoin but to know how to create the just button, right? So that guy's going to be doing fine. And so I don't know. So I shouldn't say it's so bleak, right? Like, so think about Uber. Okay, that's the great like innovative company, but libertarians, anarchists, like they love it because they're saying like, what, they're taking on the taxi monopolies and they're providing a great customer service. And that's true. It is. I love Uber. I love it to death. I feel so bad for Uber drivers. It is like a rough life. So like what they're doing is they're making it a perfectly competitive market. Profits are being driven down to zero. Like that is a rough life. So on the one hand, it's better for these people. Before there was only a taxi medallion if you didn't have it, tough titties. Now, you can compete, you can work really hard, and you will be able to learn to, earn a subsistence wage, right? But it's a brutal living. So from the consumption side, things are going to be looking good. We're going to live like consumer sultans, even if you are like a broke research assistant like me. But you know, it's a trade-off, and probably most people will like having a lot of free consumption. So that's a good thing.
Yeah, I definitely think, yeah, that side of things. I mean, that's always going to tend to be going. But yeah, kind of some of the points you brought out in your article too. It's something I've just been kind of thinking about, just philosophy in general, to kind of like broaden it. You know, people don't work in their self-interest all the time. A lot of times they work, against it, or they just, like you don't need to. I also don't believe you need to convince everyone to be an anarcho-capitalist to have some degree of freedom in your life. But how do you kind of get to that point? I think it really just starts individually. You just have to say, this is something I believe. I'm going to kind of uphold these principles, and everyone else can kind of do what they're doing, and try to stay out of their way if they're trying to force you to do something. But yeah, with Bitcoin, it's a little bit different. So I kind of want to, I guess, shift topics. Oh, wait, let me just say this. I'm going to put up this it's a comment from Michael Thomas, and I want to throw this up. You just need to make a pamphlet for these policymakers, the 5 stages of grief, like you give to a terminally ill patient. Bitcoin is a death sentence to the state, and they need to prepare for it. Yeah, I mean, yeah.
I agree.
like that. I like that. And actually, I was writing a talk. I was supposed to give it at Bitcoin in the Beltway, but we ended up doing a panel instead. But I was actually using that comparison of the 5 stages of grief in regard to how policymakers are acting towards Bitcoin, how politicians are acting. First, they don't really understand it. They're kind of like laughing at you, where they not the 5 stages of grief. I'm sorry. It was first they fight you, then they laugh at you, or first they laugh at you, then they fight you, then you win, kind of thing. But I brought in the 5 stages of grief in that, I think we're kind of in that anger stage a little bit, like we're breaking into the anger stage of things. People like Ben Losky are just going to get up there and he's going to go onto Reddit, like you said, and act like he's your friend and just blatantly lie to you. And it's what a lot of these people are comfortable with doing,
Right.
But I really think it's going to get to a point of, there maybe it won't happen like on a mass scale. Like I'm kind of wondering right now if this is still going to maybe stay a little bit small, but still be disruptive enough, to really kind of shake things up. So, maybe it's not mass adoption that really, kind of pushes things over the edge, but maybe it's a very concentrated minority of people, involved who are, extra vigilant. But I think you're still going to see anger. I mean, you see someone like, Charlie Shrem, who did his best to follow all of the laws that he possibly could, and, it didn't work out for him. He's, facing some, hopefully he doesn't, get jail time for it, but yeah, it's really unfortunate circumstances. I think they're going to be making a lot of examples out of people early on, especially more, outspoken types. But, hopefully we can. I don't know. It's a long road. It's definitely a long road. Again, like I tend to think I try to think far into the future, but it's very hard to, kind of given the current state of things, especially just considering world events and stuff like that. I mean, it's kind of scary to think about. But what do you think? I wanted to kind of shift things to kind of current events. What do you think of this alleged Satoshi email hack?
It's so nutty. I mean, like, who the hell knows, right? Like, so Jeff Garzik says he doesn't think anything's going to come out of it, and he probably is in a better position to say than I am. But of course, there's all kinds of crazy information, like another normal day in the Bitcoin world, right? Like, leave Satoshi alone, first of all. But I don't know.
Satoshi alone.
I know, I'm telling you. But like, I don't know. I kind of just feel like we're never gonna find out who he is, even if they did like publish whatever. Like, who cares? I don't know. Like, okay, so the one thing they said was like a gotcha was like they have an email from like some person who purchased something, like a Bitcoin miner, and it like was sent to that Satoshi at GMX account, and they say like, oh, I've got the credit card information, but then somebody in the comment section of that motherboard article was like, oh yeah, I can do the same thing you did, like that's stupid. Like, so in other words, like the guy was like try to show that he like had more information than he did, and then the dumbass journalist was like, oh, well, it must be because he wants to be the one to unmask Satoshi, right? Like, but
don't they all?
right. So no, I don't think Satoshi's ever gonna be found, as he should not.
I think, you know, you can do so many things in like Photoshop now. I mean, you can totally make up some fake stuff, and like journalists do any kind of actual research now. I mean, it's appalling what gets published. I mean, even back the Newsweek article,
Oh
you know,
God.
that was basically turned into a massive harassment of this poor guy who's just trying to live his life. Was such a hack job. I mean, and that is, you know, publishable now is just, it's appalling.
It was shameful. Like,
It
she
really
should have been
was.
fired. But I thought it was funny. So like later in the year, there was this brouhaha with Thomas Piketty, communist economist, trying to justify like a global takeover of like capital, whatever. And somebody at the Financial Times, Chris Giles, like wrote, I don't know, a criticism of his book or something, some bullshit. And then this Leah McGrath Goodman, who wrote the Newsweek article on Satoshi, who, you know, the libelous hack that she was upset. She said, Chris Giles published an article without clearing it with the interviewee first. A huge breach of journalistic standards. It's just like, do you really want to be throwing stones on this? Really?
Oh my God, I can't believe that.
Okay, so if you're going to harass like this mild-mannered, like private individual, you know, just minding his own business, like that's kosher. But like, you know, superstar French communist economist trying to, you know, grab power for the elite, no, can't touch him. No, that's not right.
Wow, the appalling lack of self-awareness. I can't
Right.
even.
I don't know. Some people, they're just so full of shit. Like, they don't think outside of their own little, like, dumb statist club, right? Like, you know, it's not just, like, politicians. It's just people in this culture who, like the economists and, like, the central bankers and the journalists and just the hacks, right? That their whole life is just defending whatever dumb government thing is out there, or whatever dumb government person is trying to justify the government. You know, like, their job, it's like a virus, right? Their job is just to attack that, and, like, so they don't care about, you know, poor Dorian, right? He's a nobody, and that's just how a lot of them act, and it's shitty. But they'll get theirs. You know, they're not buying bitcoins, we are, so
Hopefully,
take that.
yeah. Yeah, that's true. I mean, it is fortunate to see journalists being such predators, you know,
Right.
too. I mean, it's gotten very predatory, and it's like there's, you know, no need to be that way to support this, you know, to brag about, you know, your chains, basically. And I remember the point I was making. I was trying to make earlier about philosophy. It finally like popped back into my head, this whole idea of, you know, you're not going to have luck convincing people that, you know, freedom and liberty is a good thing for them because they like their chains so much. Like, they don't want to be free. Not only do they not want you to be free, but they're perfectly comfortable with other people making decisions for them. Like, they don't want to be free themselves. And it, like, that whole not wanting other people to be free stems from that. So you're not going to reason with these people. You know, the best thing you could do is just kind of have that kind of personal freedom. You know, you live your life as freely as you possibly can. We got a good comment. Hey, Leif, got a comment from Dave Taylor. At this point, there's too much doubt, so no matter if you actually found out who Satoshi was, nobody would believe it. Although that's not a question. That's fine if it's not a question. I take comment too in the Q&A section. Yeah.
Shame.
I think that's true too. Like, you know, as soon as I saw that like Satoshi's email account was hacked or whatever, I immediately went into kind of disbelief mode. You know, I was kind of like, okay, you know, these guys, like these journalists, like it's so hard to, you know, give any credibility to some of these publications. And I like Vice, like I will say, like there was, you know, there's some good stuff on there. You know, like my friend Lucy Steigerwald writes excellent articles about the police state for them. I mean, and some of the stuff is just so good and so hard hitting. And then you have crap like that who, I mean, they're just shamelessly trying to get attention.
Oh yeah. I have mad love for the diamonds in the rough that are, keeping it real. But unfortunately, they are few and far between. But yeah, no, the commenter makes a good point. Like, even if, like, the only way you could really tell is if somebody comes and signs, right, Satoshi's private key. But even then, maybe someone else got it, right? Like, I don't think there's a definitive way to tell. And he's not coming out and saying it. So.
Yeah, really, I guess the only thing I would be concerned about is if, the coins started moving from those first wallets. So
Right.
if those start moving, then we might have cause for concern. But those seem like they're pretty safe. And even if he is revealed, I mean, I hope he gets away. Like, I hope he's already like so far away from U.S. jurisdiction that he can't be got, because they're gonna want those taxes.
Right. Now he's already built to Moonstead. He's heading up there.
Moonsteading, yes. He's so far ahead. Like, he's like seasteading. What is that crap? Like,
no, I need to get off the rock to the moon.
To the moon. He literally. That's where he's at. He literally went to the moon.
Mm-hmm.
So thanks so much for that comment, Leif, by the way. And check out, I just got to say, Leif designed the FIFA wallet, which is a really awesome Bitcoin wallet for iPhone.
Nice.
And I did an interview with Leif Taylor and Lamar Wilson of FIFA a couple months ago. Really, really awesome guys. They gave this awesome presentation of Bitcoin in the Beltways. So definitely check those guys out, because that's just awesome stuff.
What's it called?
Stuff. The FIFA wallet.
FIFA.
Yeah.
Okay.
PHEEVA.
Okay. Cool.
Yeah. So.
Good stuff.
And yeah. And you're going to be, speaking of conferences, you're going to be talking to Coins in the Kingdom coming up next month. So what are you going to be talking about there? You had an interesting topic. Could you kind of give a little preview of what you'll be talking about?
Right. So I think the foundation of my talk will be the paper that I mentioned earlier. It's called the Bitcoin derivatives. I don't know. Bitcoin financial regulation, securities derivatives, prediction markets, and gambling. So I mentioned the topic briefly, but basically I'm going to go through some of the different developments, technological developments that are making Bitcoin-based securities trading, Bitcoin-based derivatives trading, how that's possible, what exists out there. There's some interesting developments with prediction markets. Even if there's not a platform yet, I'll talk about some of the ways it could work. And then the last topic is gambling. So part of the paper talks about how different regulations apply or could not be enforced. So I'll probably mention that briefly, but I think most of the talk will be just on the technology. And I think I'll probably bring in more of a structured talk on the monkey brains. So I didn't talk about this now, but the conclusion of my article talks about how the tools that are being developed and already exist are great, but we might not be thinking about the use cases in the right way. It's again trying to solve a technology problem when it's really a social problem. So I'll talk about some of the developments on IRC trading, how that harnesses Hayeki ideas about tacit knowledge and reputation in order to make something that's a little more human, as opposed to this idea of just jerry-rigging a bunch of multi-sig transactions and pseudonyms and crazy stuff. So whichever one wins, I'll have it covered. So
nice, that's awesome. So what do you see? What are some of your favorite future applications of blockchain technology? What do you find to be the most promising?
So I mean, I think what would be really cool is if we already have the Internet of Money now with Bitcoin. So if we could have IBM recently had a proposal for using blockchain technology and BitTorrent and then a secure messaging space, these layers together to do more of a decentralized Internet of Things. So that's something where you could buy and sell securely using distributed peer-to-peer blockchain technology, physical assets or smart house kind of technology. So this is more like the idea of smart property, right? So like if I want to rent a car from, what's it, Zipcar, like you could play with Bitcoins, and then like once you walk there, it'll like immediately know, right? You just put your phone there and then it'll unlock it, right? So, a little marginal improvement, but an improvement nonetheless, and one that just lowers transaction costs across the board. So I think that is pretty cool.
Yeah, definitely. That's awesome. Yeah. So, I guess, not having a whole lot of questions and answers. I'm gonna kind of do a last call for any questions people may have. I would definitely like to address those. But yeah, do you have any other thoughts you'd like to add? Any kind of final thoughts for people thinking about blockchain technology and some of these advancements?
Great. I would say like jump in, learn, create, do, build. It's a really exciting time for people like us, so make the most of it. And I will be watching. I will be writing about it.
Yes, yes, and yeah, it really is an exciting time. I think for people our age, especially the millennial generation that's grown up with an appreciation of technology. I mean, I've gone from having my very first computer in the 90s, and how I remember how clunky it was, and I remember dial-up and all these things, and it's changed so rapidly and so quickly, and I really think that our generation especially has a strong appreciation for that, and I think they're going to be much more apt to get into Bitcoin and blockchain technology too than maybe some. I mean, I've had at least more luck talking to people my age about it than maybe older generations.
Right.
So.
Yep. The digital natives. So make it happen.
Yeah. So where can people find your work?
So I write at theumlaut.com. It's like the little dots, but it's spelled out. I also tweet pretty regularly. My Twitter handle is Anjiecast, so that's ANJIECAST. So yeah, check it out, and feel free to, I don't know, holler.
Awesome. Well, definitely follow Andrea on Twitter. Check out some of her articles. They're so well researched too. I just have to say, like, reading through them, there's just so many links that, like, I find myself going off on rabbit trails. Like, I do that anyway, but it's like, especially with your stuff, I'll be like clicking through, like, oh my gosh, this is just like, just go down the rabbit hole. It's like, wait a second, what was I reading? Okay, go back.
Yeah.
But yeah.
My links are kind of you are in my brain, because these are the things that I have been reading that like was jogging my memory. So yes, it's kind of like the full experience.
Yes, I love that. I love that.
Oh, Fritz wants to say bye. Okay.
Oh yeah. Say hi to the Doge.
Oh, he's biting. All right. Well, yeah. Thanks so much for having me. This was a lot of fun, and yeah, I'll be tuning in to future crypto convos.
Awesome. Thank you so much. And I'll say one more comment from Leif. You guys are doing a good job of covering the bases, just enjoying the convo. Thank you, Leif. That's exactly what I'm going for, is we're just sitting here chilling. So, so check out next week. My guest will be Thomas Hunt, the man behind the madness of mad Bitcoins. So check that out. It's going to be a really fun conversation. Thomas is a great guy. And you can also see other crypto convos on World Crypto Network, too. Definitely check World Crypto Network out. We're doing our own decentralized media campaign right now, and it's really exciting stuff. So check that out. And until next time, keep calm and encrypt on.
Great. All right. See ya.
See ya.